How my grandpa became the owner of a gas station garage. My family immigrated America in the 1880s and settled in Nebraska. We were farmers for the first 80 years or so, but back in the 1960s my great-grandma decided she was going to sell the entire farm before she died and simply give her sons 1/3 of money for inheritance when she passed. She had 3 sons. In 1969 my great-grandma passed, and her 3 sons inherited the money she had earned from selling the farm. My grandpa decided he would basically let that money sit until after he retired from the military. In 1971 he deployed to Vietnam for his second and final deployment. At the end of his deployment he returned to Nebraska and retired after 22 years in the service. Now he had an old Chevy truck at the time and was in the process of building a concrete business with the money he had gotten from his inheritance. Well, during this time, his truck engine blew up. My grandpa was busy at the time and he didn't want to fool with the truck cause he was busy. So he bought himself the engine he wanted to replace it with, which was an upgrade, and he went down to the only garage in town and asked them if they'd be willing to put the engine in the truck. They agreed on a price, and told him to come back in a week or so. A week later my grandpa comes back and picks up the truck. He admits he felt like a fool for not double-checking the work, but assumed since this was the son of his friend that the son would do right by him. This was a small town. Well, my grandpa opens up the concrete business, and he's busy, and it comes time for his first oil change. This is about 4 months after he got the truck back. He's doing the oil change and he notices that the engine he bought isn't the engine in his truck. It's a smaller engine. This obviously pisses him off to high heaven, as my grandma liked to say. So he storms on down to the garage and talks to shop. Earl was the owner. Earl comes out, and denies any wrongdoing. Says he did as he was told, and it shouldn't have taken him 4 months to bring the issue up. My grandpa tells Earl he needs to do what's right. Earl refuses. It's important to note, this is a small town. Written contracts, and so forth really isn't a thing. Your worth is your word. My grandpa tells Earl he's going to get him for this. Earl laughs and tells him to leave his shop. My grandpa goes down to the county and requests the record for who owns that gas station. Turns out it's an old family friend named Harold. My grandpa stops by Harold's house and starts inquiring about the business deal Harold has with Earl. Harold says well, Earl rents the gas station garage from him. My grandpa asks Harold how is everything going, and Harold confides that Earl hasn't paid his rent in 2 months. My grandpa asks, "Do you have a written lease with Earl?" To which Harold goes, "Nah, I sure don't." My grandpa then asks, "What if I bought the gas station garage from you?" Harold isn't completely on board with the idea, but my grandpa makes a strong point. Earl isn't paying his rent. Harold doesn't seem like he has much interest in being a landlord anymore, and my grandpa has the cash to buy the place outright. Harold, sensing something is up, asks my grandpa, "Did Earl do something to you? You seem awfully interested in this garage. Ain't you busy with that concrete business of yours?" And my grandpa fills Harold in on the story. My grandpa also mentions that he has a son, my father, who needs something to do, and he'd be happy to buy the whole building from Harold for a fair price, and what happens after that is his business. Also, it's important to note, when Harold decided to rent this business to Earl, in that deal went all the equipment and tools that Harold had acquired over the years, so those belonged to the building. Harold and my grandpa came to a number that they both agreed on. A few days later my grandpa paid Harold in cash, in full, for the business. The paperwork is done and my grandpa is now the proud owner of a gas station and mechanic shop. Now my grandpa senses that Earl ain't going to be too pleased when my grandpa fires Earl, so for extra good measure my grandpa calls up the local sheriff, who is a high school friend, and asks the sheriff to come with him to break the news to Earl. So my grandpa and the sheriff go down to Earl's now former business and they walk in, and before my grandpa can even say hello, Earl says, "Now I told you, I didn't cheat you." My grandpa smiles and says, "I'm not here about my truck. I'm here to fire you." Earl, with a look of confusion on his face, asks, "You can't fire me. I own this business." My grandpa shows him the title and says, "I'm now the owner of this building," to which Earl fires back, "But I got a deal with Harold." And the sheriff speaks up, "You do? Do you have a lease?" "Well, no," Earl says, to which the sheriff smiles and says, "In that case, you're going to need to take your stuff and leave." Earl is fuming pissed, grabs his toolbox and storms out. My grandpa ended up hiring the mechanic that would occasionally work on his trucks at his concrete business. He had my aunt and grandma run the gas station full-time and my dad would work there after school. Had a former partner go through this. I will tell you exactly what social repercussions for family went through. It was totally absurd. Locals who've been going to a certain business for decades will likely assume that the current owners are just selling out and abandoning the community. A family friend of my ex-girlfriend went through this when her parents sold their small-town convenience store to an Indian family. The parents were discreetly feeling around for an offer just out of curiosity. The father had medical bills going up each year, so it was inevitable the place was going to be sold at some point. An Indian family from down south got word of a business opportunity, made an offer. A really good one and more than was predicted. And after sitting down with all parties, they settled on a price, and within a couple months the Indians would fully take over. Oh boy, did the locals ever give it to her family. Harassing them at the store and in public. Ignoring them completely at social functions and get-togethers. Their church stopped inviting them to their monthly get-togethers and made them persona non grata at congregations. Don't talk to the greedy pariahs who wanted a payday. Their houses and cars were egged regularly. Folks would do donuts in their front lawn and tear up the grass. Combined with the racism of a lot of folks living there, my ex-GF's family was seen as the enemy for letting them come into their community. The store wasn't the only thing that was sold. Within 6 months, the entire family sold their home and left that town just to live a normal life and get away from the awful behavior of most of its residents. All that for selling a business. Small communities see small local businesses they frequent as theirs, and when you take their shiny toys. Oh dear God. Wouldn't matter if the new owners were Indian or more white people, the reaction would be the same. Small towners hate change with a fiery passion. The Indian family is still there 20 years later, doing very well, even better than the previous owners. A lot of the previous problem residents have gradually died off and the church as a result had to close. There were like 5 members of the congregation left near the end. A lot of the folks under the age of 50 embrace the differences of the Indian family and enjoy them in the community. It's just unfortunate that for the first 10 years, the majority of the prominent community members were your typical small-town narrow-minded wasps who get defensive over any little thing changing in their town. There. Those are your social repercussions, lol. Thank you. While I do see a sentiment in that direction, I've never heard of anything more than quietly muttered gossip in my country. But since you mentioned that the story happened 20 years ago, then yeah. People were more extreme then, though the 2000s were already a developed time. Well, he's probably getting older and realizing his mortality. I used to be like that. Did a ton for money, then last year happened and I realized you can't take it all with you, so he's choosing to let go of his money. I'm glad you're getting the land. In the long run it will be worth a ton more just for the memories. Hopefully he sees you as a worthy successor. We have 2 auto shops in the small town I live in. Soon it will be 1. See, the dickhead who owns the soon-to-be closing shop got caught having sex in a Walmart parking lot with a 20-yo girl. Apparently he does a lot of work for women and then slips hints about lowering the bill. The day he got caught his wife left him before the day was over. When she left she took the kids, and has since sold the house. Now nobody goes there anymore. Literally within 24 hours of him getting caught everyone in town knew about it. Before corporate farms became a thing, I worked for one of the only full-service stations in KS. Many of the old guys were millionaires driving beat-up trucks and drinking quarter coffee in the back of the station. I knew, but a lot of the new folks in town didn't. They'd sometimes ask the name of the high rollers being assholes were with a wink. Yes, it was a legit business. There's actually a funny story behind how he gave the business away. My grandpa had 2 daughters, and therefore 2 son-in-laws. Well, one son-in-law, he's still my uncle, my grandpa loved dearly. The other son-in-law my grandpa hated with a deep burning passion, and for good reason. Now both of them were married on the same day, not the same year, but same day different years. Well, and I believe it was 1998. We had a big happy anniversary party for both couples. The son-in-law my grandpa loved got the concrete business, which had lots of revenue, gov contracts, etc. handed over to him free of charge. The son-in-law my grandpa hated got a basic wall clock.